From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot here with Kim Strassel and Alicia Finley talking about the president's decision to cancel loans for tens of millions of American student loans. Let's go in a little bit deeper into the argument on the legal authority to do this, Kim. I mean, at the most basic level, what you're talking about is the fact that Congress didn't approve any of this. Democrats have tried over the years to get some loan forgiveness into legislation, never been able to do it. So they said, oh, okay, the president can do it unilaterally. But you had Joe Biden say himself in 2021 that he was pretty sure he didn't have the authority to do it. You had Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, say that explicitly in, I think it was 2021, when this was being first debated. So now suddenly they're all saying, yes, he does. And they dig into statutes here, and you've got an education memo and a Justice Department memo justifying it. What do you make of that?
Yeah, they know that it's not legal. And those memos, if you read them, are simply sort of desperate readings of the law in an attempt to stretch it. That's what makes the whole thing kind of amazing. Again, Biden himself said it was questionable whether or not he had this authority. Pelosi was absolutely matter of fact. She said, let's just be clear. The president can modify loans, he can delay them, he can do a lot of things. But if you're going to talk about canceling debt, and I quote her, that has to be an act of Congress, end quote. And you do have some Democrats, those that were more opposed on this. I noticed that Chris Pappas, who was a Democrat in New Hampshire in the House, was complaining that this sidesteps Congress, that it needs to go through the legislative process. But for the most part, you're right, Paul, everyone's just pretending, no big deal, it's just a little thing. We're just forgiving a little bit of debt. I mean, we have a separation of powers. Congress controls the purse strings. No one can suggest that this is a minor amount of money. I mean, this is enormous. It's a huge sum. And I don't think that there's any real reading where this actually can be justified easily legally. Now, the bigger question is going to be who has the standing to bring a suit here and sue to kind of stop this? And then how quickly do the courts act and how long before it gets to the Supreme Court, which is a different issue too.
Yeah, you have to have under Supreme Court standing doctrine, concrete injury. Somebody has to be able to point to a concrete injury in order to be able to sue. This is mostly institutions, individuals, sometimes states. Alicia, looking at that standard for lawsuits, who's injured here?
Obviously, the people who are injured are the Americans who will have to pay taxes and didn't benefit from this loan forgiveness, but they don't have a concrete injury under Article 3 standing principles. So those who would potentially be injured or be able to prove legal standing would be the loan servicers or the debt collectors. They have contracts with the federal government to collect on the loans and service these loans, but they would potentially actually receive less money now that they have to service or collect less debt. Now, whether they'll actually sue is a different question. Do they really want to antagonize the federal government? Which
their clients, yeah.
Right, exactly. Though some of the loan servicers have gotten pretty fed up with the federal government in recent years. Two of them just left the market, including Navient, because these loan repayment plans are so difficult to administer, and then they get blamed by students and the government when they don't do it correctly. So potentially they may and say, well, screw you. But I think the other people or the other potential party who could sue is Republicans if they gain control of the House or Senate, one or the other chamber in the fall. If you recall back during the Obama years, the Obama administration essentially appropriated money for these cost-sharing Obamacare subsidies that Congress didn't appropriate. And so House Republicans went to court and sued, and they actually got a victory in the district court level. Now, this didn't set any precedent because there wasn't a D.C. Circuit Court ruling on this. But potentially Republicans could use the same tactic and sue the Biden administration and claim that you spent money that we did not actually appropriate.
Okay, we'll see how those lawsuits proceed if they are indeed filed. Kim, let's go on to the political fallout here, which could be considerable. One of the interesting immediate effects has been that some centrist Democrats who are running for Congress this year, Michael Bennet in Colorado, Meg Hassan in New Hampshire, have criticized the decision on loans, saying this isn't the way they would handle it. They'd like to reform the student loan program. So they're speaking out about it. I don't know how aggressive they will be, probably not very aggressive, but it's still notable in an election year that they're doing that. Both of them are up for re-election. The Democratic argument here, the progressive argument, is pretty straightforward. It's amounts of clear vote buying. You, sir, are getting 10K or 20K right off the top, and we delivered it for you. And it's a bigger version of, Tammany Hall walking around passing street money, basically, in the old New York City, delivering Thanksgiving turkeys to all of their voters. This just happens to be a lot more expensive way of doing it. But that's their argument. Now, if you're a Republican or a critic of this, how do you make the alternative argument?
Well, by the way, too, the purest example of this political cynicism, what was really behind this, Paul, is coupled obviously with the loan forgiveness, was also the announcement that the White House will be continuing to pause repayment for everybody else for the next 4 months, meaning until the election gets done. So it was so nakedly political as to be something. If you're Republicans, here's the argument that you're making. I mean, just a couple of observations. First of all, on those centrist Democrats you mentioned. If you think about it, Democrats have spent the past 18 months fighting with each other over the Biden agenda. They finally come together on the Inflation Reduction Act and get some unity. And now Joe Biden has released another proposal that is dividing them again. And, to me, one of the most notable comments, because I think it gets to the bigger political liabilities, came from Ohio Representative Tim Ryan, who is running for the Senate seat in that state. It's a big stakes election there. And he went after this proposal. And I'm going to read what he said because I thought that it says a lot. He says, waiving debt for those already on a trajectory for financial security sends a wrong message to millions of Ohioans who are working hard to make ends meet. And this was just notable because this is a class where he and J.D. Vance, who is a Republican, are fighting very hard for the working class vote. And it signals who this is going to make angry. And there are a lot of groups out there that are going to be unhappy about this. Everyone who ever went to college and repaid their debt, every family, by the way, who has scrimped and saved to manage to get their kid through college, maybe without incurring debt, people that have gone to trade school, folks that are out there working blue collar jobs, because this isn't forgiveness, by the way, right? That word is so wrong because this is everyone else paying for a very small group of people who basically wanted to spend 9 years getting master's degrees in gender studies. And that's just not going to make a lot of folks happy. So that's the argument Republicans are going to make, that this potentially gets Democrats sideways with a lot of very key voting groups, whether it's some suburban voters, working class voters, older voters. And so, yeah, maybe you get some young, college educated Democratic activists who do come out and vote for you, but will it be worth the political pain you incur?
It's an investment politically, Alicia, but it's an investment by the Democrats in their new coalition, which is these relatively well-off college educated voters who have moved their way in significant fashion in recent years against the working class of tradesmen, plumbers, and all kinds of others who don't go to college or maybe go to some kind of trade school, FedEx drivers, and so on, who have been moving toward the Republicans. This will reinforce that divide.
I think that's right. If you look at the polls, Democrats have a lot more support actually among the college educated, and particularly among the PhD class, than they do among those who didn't go to college. And part of this is when kids go to college, they essentially get indoctrinated in a lot of what Kim was referring to, DEI, gender inclusivity, and all of that. And you're seeing that actually out in California, where you have Hispanics becoming a little more liberal, or at least those who went to college. And you also see that in the polls. I don't want to be cynical here, but I'm sure that that plays into why Democrats are pushing four-year colleges so much, is because they're a way to indoctrinate students, whereas that isn't true for kids who go to technical colleges.
Well, it's going to be fascinating to see how it plays out here in the next couple of months, and then maybe spilling into the 2024 presidential campaign as well, depending on how the Republican candidates choose to respond. So thank you, Kim. Thank you, Alicia. Thank you all for listening. You can catch us every day on Potomac Watch, and please send cards and letters to pwpodcast@wsj.com. Thanks for listening.